I think I gave up a while ago on this idea of like, I have to have this big thing to aim for because I've loved collaborating, engaging so much with different groups of people and being able to produce things like this project. If anything, I'm just striving to let go a little bit and understand that you can't always have this control over everything. And it's good to not have that and good not to not fall into these traps of thinking, okay, if there isn't an immediate monetary value being ascribed to what this is it worth it?
Hello and welcome. As always, I'm Abbie. This is Stories Lived, Stories Told. And today I invite you to join me and Sydney McLeod as we take a communication perspective on creativity under capitalism and comic books. To take a communication perspective is to consider what we're making and how we're making it through our communication practices. This means we look closely at patterns, context, stories, and relationships, and that we use curiosity, mindfulness, collaboration, and dialogue to create better social worlds. Whether the topic of today's conversation is familiar to you or not, the hope is that using a communication perspective will reveal new ways of seeing and being. At the top of the episode, you heard our conversation partner today, Sydney McLeod. They are a comic book illustrator located in Scotland. If you have been listening to our other recent episodes, then you may have heard Syd's name mentioned already because they are the illustrator for the CosmoTeenz Comic Book on mental health. This past month, I was able to speak with each of the 5 fellows involved in the CosmoTeenz project, which is an initiative of the CMM Institute for Personal and Social Evolution. And now we get to kick this month off with Syd. This conversation with Syd serves 2 purposes here in that we get to wrap up our conversation about the upcoming CosmoTeenz comic book, and also it acts as the first installment in our new topic for this month, which is about taking a communication perspective on art. Throughout this next month, we will be in conversation with other artists, writers, and creatives to ask, what are we making in our art, and why does it matter? So let's begin with Syd. Hi, Sydney. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so looking forward to this.
So looking forward to speaking with you. Obviously, I know you because you are working on the CosmoTeenz comic book right now. And people that are listening will be a little bit familiar with that because I've had some conversations with the CosmoTeenz themselves and got to hear a little bit about their experience. So I'm excited to hear about your side of that experience, but also just more generally about your life, your story, your experiences as an illustrator. To start us off, before I get too ahead of myself, would you mind introducing yourself, telling us a little bit about who you are and how you see yourself in the world?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Sydney and I'm a non-binary illustrator and comic artist. I'm based in Scotland and I've been working in this industry for about, give or take, 5 years. I started quite low-key grassroots, like doing sort of zines and some small projects. And then I gradually moved into doing some bigger things, some Arts Council funded projects, some big kind of crowdfunding things and my own personal stuff. And I've been so lucky to work with a variety of really wonderful individuals, the likes of the CosmoTeenz in particular.
Yeah.
And I kind of see myself as someone always looking to push myself, to grow and to learn from. This is quite a new medium as comics, is what I'm working in predominantly. And so I'm always excited to keep kind of pushing the boundaries of what they can do and learning from them and helping others learn from them as well. So that's really about where I'm at in this kind of journey that I'm on.
Yeah. Well, tell me more about your relationship to art. You say, that, comic book is maybe a new kind of medium, doing online illustrations. What's your journey with art been? Have you always been an artist?
I've always loved doing art from a very, very young age. I was obsessed with it. Anyone could tell you that I was really engaged. I wanted to do that. There's a lot of talk, obviously, in how valuable art is and how likely you can pursue it as like a career path. So when it came towards me doing or picking a career university kind of level, tertiary education, I was leaning more in towards literature, kind of things that could maybe funnel into journalism, that sort of thing. And for my whole undergraduate degree, I did kind of pursue that and think that's what I was going to end up doing. and I gave up art for a long time. And then towards the end of that that little stint doing something else, I was like, no, actually, I'd really like to return to doing art and focusing on that. And so I kind of asked around with the careers group that was available to me at the university I was attending, and they said, yeah, well, you have a lot of pathways open to your field, despite my portfolio being pretty non-existent, having not done it for so many years. They were very, very eager to help and set me up with what I'm doing now, because I took to that and I ran with it. I don't know, maybe if in my head I was thinking, I've already changed once, I'm going to commit. Whatever it is that comes next, I'm going to commit. And I was lucky enough to be able to do that. So yeah, it started young, it grew and it settled a little bit, and now it's just, it's what I do all the time and I love it.
Yeah. What is it about doing art that you love?
It's, for me, as I grew up neurodivergent as well, so it was a really easy way to express myself. And I think a lot of people feel that with art as well.
Yeah.
As I said, when I kind of moved away from like the English background that I had, the literature background, I keep calling it English, but literature-based background that I had, there was always something I felt missing from it, just solely doing the likes of poetry and prose. And I did film courses part of that as well. I liked elements of both. I felt that I need just that extra push. I then moved into like theatre and the dramatic side of things. That, weirdly, and I could talk ad nauseam about this, but it seems the most in line with what comics are as a medium, which sounds strange to people, but there's a lot there that really unites for me. So it was just a natural jump then for me to go into that. And I think those messages of basically, like I've talked about before, the educational merits of it, and I love to challenge like authority a lot with what I do, work against the curve, stereotypes and inverting them, that sort of thing. That's something comics really gave me the freedom to do. And I think that's what a lot of people kind of brighten at when they read that and they see that sequential medium. It's really easy to pull people in with something like that because they associate comics, a lot of people do anyway, with fun and with enjoying yourself and with being able to let go a little bit. And you can hide a lot within that as a medium in terms of the messages that you want to convey and the kind of stories, the connections, interpersonal connections that you can reveal for people, which is really what I focus on a lot now.
Yeah, that's so neat. I, growing up, was never a comic book person, but I was able to, in one of my classes at university, read a graphic novel that was part of talking about the civil rights movement in the United States. And I had just never encountered anything like that. You know, in school, I'm reading textbooks and, you know, other kind of books, but certainly no kind of comic books or things that were illustrated like that. And it was so engaging. And so that's when I heard that the CosmoTeenz were going to do a comic book, I was immediately like, oh, yes, of course that could work. I wouldn't have thought about that because it's still like not a medium that I'm used to or as familiar with. But I immediately was like, oh, that could definitely be really great.
Absolutely.
I, too, am a lover of words, obviously, as a communicator and someone that does podcast. So I'm with you on the, you know, what you maybe experienced when you were studying literature, talking about poetry and all of that. But I do recognize that, that's not all there is. So it's interesting to me to think about art, illustration, comic books as its own form of communication. So I'm curious, and maybe specifically with your experience being neurodivergent, what can you say about, you know, what is it about art that is, you know, its own kind of self-expression, its own kind of communication that is distinctly different from just words? You know, what kind of value does it add for you?
I think, as I mentioned from like kind of the top of our conversation, in that it's simultaneously a really old medium and a really young medium. And in that, I think it's kind of coming to terms with its own identity. And for me, that was really important in coming to terms with my identity. So it just seemed like a perfect merging. Obviously, the canon of literature, like most people know, and like New York's like anthology poets kind of thing, everything seemed so established in these other mediums, new wave cinemas, that sort of thing. It felt like you're always catching up, whereas comics felt like a space that was open and that you could engage at any point. There were the classics that you could, the big, you know, two that you could kind of jump in and learn that, and a lot of people love, or going in a completely different direction with small press, indie comics, that sort of thing, which is kind of where my niche kind of lies. And in that way, it was a really useful tool for me being able to learn, okay, well, it doesn't have to limit what I can do with this. And that's a really useful way of inviting other people's in. And that you said as well, you're like, I didn't really grow up reading comics, and I didn't grow up reading comics either. In Scotland, there's a big culture around the Beano, the Dandy, kind of the DC Thompson comics, which are really popular and still running to these days. They used to post them out to kids, and you can still get like a membership, I'm pretty sure. And so that's what most people associate it with.
You're right.
Particularly in Scotland and the UK, I think. I did a web series where I spoke to a lot of different people within the UK comic scene about how they started and how they kind of came to grips with comics or listening to it, learning about it. And a lot of them cited like the Dandy and the Beano. And then when they figured out there was a whole other world behind it, they were like, okay, now I can see. As with anything, you kind of see what it is at face value and think, well, straight off the bat, yes or no, does that invite me in? Do I feel like I could get involved with this? Whereas comics, I feel, is a lot easier in terms of money. It's really easy to get engaged with. Web comics are a huge thing at the moment.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people are able to interact there. And I think that's also a great outlet in terms of what we've already spoken about as well, in terms of neurodivergence and identity, stuff like that. Webcomics are great for that because it's straight and it's honest, and it's not got like third parties hovering over it being like, we should edit that, we should tweak that, this, that, and the next thing. You're seeing people for what they are. And that's a really solid foundation, I think, for where people perhaps unwittingly find that they're a fan of these types of things, which is really, really interesting.
Yeah, it resonates with me, and it's cool to hear you say that, you know, that it's about the space that is there, the kind of openness for the medium, that there's still a lot of room to kind of, make your own way and kind of be a part of setting the tone since it's newer, and that it feels like an invitation. And that's really cool, because I think that's something that I, think about a lot when I'm thinking about kind of communication and the relationships and the spaces we create with each other. How can we kind of like invite people in and invite people to tell their stories and be, their authentic, vulnerable selves, be in spaces that they feel safe to do all of those things. So I'm hearing that parallel, and that, you have found that space.
100%. Yes, absolutely. I think as well, there's a particular perception, I think, of comic fans when you hear about it and you think of the likes of maybe San Diego Comic-Con, which is this big event, encapsulates a lot of different things, a lot of different medias even as well, video games and film and that sort of thing. It was really interesting to me when I spoke to people about what they view as like being their communities within like comic spaces. They are able to identify loads of different ones, and I have peer groups kind of peppered around the world who also have their different interpretations of that. Like there's like a small Scottish scene, there's like a London scene, which is entirely just for one city, but then there's like niche other ones about the UK. There's people across the water, obviously in America, have like their own little indie kind of bookshops and such, where they're thinking that's kind of like where our scene is based. And within those, there are obviously loads of different ways that these people kind of view comics and are able to enjoy them, which I've only ever found to be positive.
Yes, right.
They're always very open about everything. I don't think anyone in like any of the comic circles that I engage with are like, no, it's my way or the highway when it comes to reading comics and how this should be considered, which is really refreshing. I feel like there can be a lot of gatekeeping when you're like kind of trying to get involved in these different kind of spaces, and comics are really good for being very chill, very cool about that, which also makes it seem really enticing to be involved in.
Absolutely. That makes sense. And that's good to hear that, there is room for openness. I'm thinking about, that you've worked on a number of projects. I was able to see the one that you worked on with Barbara McKay. Because I can't remember the organization that you worked with exactly, but, telling the 3 different women's stories in comic book form. And that was amazing to me. And now getting to see you work with the CosmoTeenz. I'm curious about what it's like for you, since you've collaborated with so many different people. What have you learned from collaborating with so many different people? What are the challenges? What do you see in those collaborations?
I love collaborating so much. I think particularly in the past year, I've done a lot of tabling events, kind of interacting with folk in like by myself in a solo kind of setting, just sort of selling my own work. So people sometimes ask, well, a lot of this is just like, it's all you, kind of, it's all by yourself. And I was like, I cannot express how fully I would love to collaborate all the time and
Mm-hmm.
just do that. But I also see the merit in obviously paying people for their work. And unfortunately, because of the climate and circumstances, I would love to pay writers, editors, everyone to
Yes,
come
yes.
involved. But because I can't do that, that's why I love getting involved and coming on board with all these different teams. The things I've learned have been so valuable.
Mm-hmm.
The project I did with Barbara initially for Pause in Dundee, I was brought on by a peer of mine, as a co-editor. I obviously drew a comic for that, and then we edited and designed it together, and we wrote the
Mm-hmm.
scripts and what have you. And massive shout out to Haley for helping me do that, because she was so good in showing me the ropes and saying, this is what we would usually do. Here's how we would make notes for this. Here's how we would propose changes, da 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 da. And a lot of that I've taken on to this CosmoTeenz project, because I'm kind of spearheading the art side of things, and able to work with everyone in that capacity, thanks to Trent's amazing organization, without which I would be lost. That is my Achilles heel in these projects. I have grand ideas, but I do not have the scheduling to fulfill a lot of them. So, but no, it's wonderful. It's all about being able to come at it. Like I said before, when I was doing my web series, I love listening. I love listening to people's stories and being able to give them the space to tell them without judgment, and be able to reflect them in what I then go on to create, and make sure that it honors what they want to see and the vision that they have, which is so important, and which is what I learned from obviously doing all these different collaboration projects. I do work with others outside of this. I've done charity things as well, and little bits here and there, and everything. I make sure to go in really calm, really like keep it like as within the realms of reality as possible. And then if I find, okay, I've got that down, the next project, I'm like, I can push it, and now we can see what we can keep doing, which is really, really, it's so rewarding as well when you get to speak to people at the end of it, as that's the kind of stage we're at now, where we're gathering kind of like the reflections from the CosmoTeenz, and finding out how they found it, being able to read back on that and understand that process if we've gone along, and be like, oh, it's wonderful.
To talk a little bit more about CosmoTeenz specifically, just for people that are still learning about what CosmoTeenz is, if I, said to you, so what is CosmoTeenz? How would you describe the project?
I would say it's been one filled with so much valuable insight. From the initial interviews that we had with the fellows on this project, I was blown away by how in tune these young people were with their own feelings, their own development, their own voice particularly. Everyone had such a clear idea of what they wanted to say, how they wanted to say it, and acknowledging the roots from where that had come from, which was wonderful. It's been incredible to work on. I do a lot of like long-term projects, but this has been one that I've looked forward to every single time I sit down to work on it, because it's allowed these young people to look back on themselves and journeys where they've been struggling, or they've acknowledged the struggles of others, and they've been able to rise from that in a literal sense for a lot of them, and also be able to share it in a way that they're like, this will be helpful for others, which is great as an educational tool, because it allows people to see that they're not existing within a vacuum within their own selves, which is so important, and which comics is amazing at doing, because as you said, so I feel like with books you need to dedicate a lot of time to, and to digest exactly what's coming through. With comics, a lot of the time you can gain that just from a surface glance, which is also a good way to pull readers in. So, and that's what these young people, I feel, have been able to do as well. In just a brief kind of hour or so interviews that we had, we were able to glean so much from their experiences, and then parse them into these stories, which I really hope that we deliver to like the height of their expectations, and they're able to proudly say, yep, we did this, and this is how it came through for us, and we're really, really pleased with it, because I'm pleased with them and all the work they've put into it. They've been really wonderful, especially in this transitional time. Obviously a lot of them have moved on to different places and doing different things, so busy.
I can report back that the sense that I've gotten from them is that they're really excited about what you and Trent have been able to create, and that it's so meaningful for them to see their stories come alive in this way. And that's, not something that everybody gets the opportunity to see their story brought to life like that. So it's cool that, it is, yes, meaningful for them. And then, like you said, hopefully also meaningful for other people in the way that it can kind of help people understand that, yeah, they're not alone in what they experience. And maybe they didn't experience exactly what each of the teens have gone through, but they see some similarities in their stories. And yeah, I'm just always thinking about the stories that we're telling. As I've said, that's just like a big frame for me. And so it is cool for the teens to be able to start to tell some new stories, is kind of how I see it, that they maybe, the stories that we tell ourselves around like our mental well-being, not always like the kindest. We haven't always had a lot of like tools or language to even share our stories or to feel comfortable to do so. And so I see this as being part of telling a new story and giving people language, giving people permission, giving people space to share stories about the real things that they struggle with and what it feels like to be them. So maybe that's a little bit of a connection too with your experience with the world of comic books, that it is the goal being to like create this safe space where people can share about their real lives and experiences, even if it is, a little messy, that there's room for that. And that's invited, actually.
That's a wonderful way of putting it, of there being like tools and language that we're able to offer that they can then adapt as and when they need it. One of the fellow story in particular looks a lot into that, about how they've kind of adapted tools within their life to make that kind of transition through difficult periods, which is kind of a thread throughout all the stories, I think, which was really another really wonderful thing, because I'm not sure how much conferring there was backstage within their own kind of circle, but certainly when we spoke to them, there were common elements within each story, whether they knew it or not. And I thought that's really wonderful, and it shows kind of like the respect and connection that they've all kind of grown to have for one another, which is also really wonderful when you know that this group obviously supports each other and they want to see this all succeed and come out really great on the other end. It's really nice.
That's really cool. I'm glad that you've been able to have that experience with it, and I know that you've brought a lot of value to that project as well, that everyone is very grateful for, that you have the skills that they don't have to do the illustrating. I'm thinking about just how much creativity you have to be able to do what you do. Or if I think about the CosmoTeenz too, everyone, you have to have some amount of creativity to, be in relationship, to communicate with people, to tell stories, to do art. And that's something that I think people relate to differently. So I'm curious about your relationship to creativity. Are you someone that thinks like, oh, I'm a creative person? Or do you feel like creativity is maybe like a skill that you've developed through your art?
It's a really interesting question, actually. I definitely would have said in my younger years, at the drop of a hat, I would have been like, I'm creative. I'm a creative person. That's how I see myself. I don't know if it was maybe that break I took in my university years. And I don't know if I've ever in recent years referred to myself as a creative person. The relationship that I have now, being a freelance comic artist and illustrator, is very strange. I like to joke with people that since I started doing art for a living, I've never done less art in my life. If it makes sense. As a freelancer, you have to like wear so many hats. I learned this particularly doing my web series because I stretched myself quite thin with that, but I was in it for the end goal and I loved it so much. But really, I was like a social media promoter at that time. I was an interviewer. I was a video editor. I was the artist and designer of obviously the series as well. And that's kind of reflecting on what it's like to be a freelance creative as well, is that you have to wear these so many hats in order to compensate. Like I said before, collaboration is so good when you can do it in a setting where it's very informal and there doesn't have to be like this end goal of like we need to make profits and we need to meet these margins, that sort of thing. But sadly, as that's how the world works, if you can't afford to pay someone to be like your email guy or someone who comes along that's it, you're like, okay, well today is this and today is that. Fundamentally, I do think I am a creative person. More so I would describe myself as a student, particularly of the medium of the arts in general.
Yeah.
I've learned so much from my peers, my co-workers, from doing projects like this. And I've taught students as well, but I would still see myself on their terms. I would still see myself at their level, because even through teaching, I'm like, this is a first for me. I'm learning how to do that as well. So it's really rewarding for me to see it as that. And then I feel like there's less pressure to be like, well, I'm a creative, so I should be able to do blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, right.
That, which is always like a lot of pressure to put on yourself. So that way I think it's easier to breathe, and that's how I kind of see my social world a little bit as well, is that when you're less of, oh, you're X, Y, and Z, or you're this label kind of thing, everyone relaxes so much more, which is always really nice.
Yeah, I see that as well. And that's why for me, I think it probably is helpful to get away from some of that language to say, oh, well, I'm a creative person, or, oh, I'm just not a creative person. Because I think I don't think that's actually how it works. It's not something you are or are not, something you can cultivate. And I would imagine that the reason maybe people see themselves as creative or not is whether or not they've been given the space to cultivate that. So talking about, the stories that we have, thinking about pursuing something like you're doing, like being a freelance illustrator, pursuing any kind of career or path in the arts, in this kind of society that I experience in the United States, that's very much about like productivity and capitalism. It's counterintuitive, or it feels countercultural, I guess is how I would say it. It's a little bit of like a rebellion, like you said. And so it's interesting to me, people's relationship to creativity, what changes when they start to see themselves as someone that has the potential to be creative, or just getting rid of that like binary, I guess, if you're either creative or you're not, or your job is creative or it's not, or the way that you are is creative or not. Because again, like obviously your life involves a lot of creativity, but even the people who are sitting in their 9-to-5 desk jobs, like they have to have some element of creativity or imagination, I would say. Every idea, you have to have a base of imagination to come up with any kind of new ideas. And so I'm curious about people being able to connect with that side of themselves more, which again is hard when the society is maybe not necessarily telling stories or giving out messages that say, we value this.
100%. Yeah, I could not agree more with that. And like you're saying, in terms of like people who think like, oh, I'm just sitting at a 9-to-5 office job, how could that be perceived as creative? I think my sister is one of the most creative people I know. She works as like a personal trainer, kind of like a fitness instructor, but she's always bringing new ideas to how she does that, in terms of perhaps games to do as like a workshop, or introducing a new way of scheduling workouts, that sort of thing. And that's like a way of being creative without you even, it's subconscious, which is, I think, is so important. And like you're saying, obviously society, I think it's particularly prevalent in kind of like UK culture as well, that there's a lot of like funding being cut from the arts at the moment.
Yeah, right.
Which is really, and obviously there's this the whole rise in the AI kind of trend, and there's the NFT thing of a few years ago. Obviously, like the arts is always under attack for something or else, but that's like the beauty of it as well. Like I've been talking about growth, and with growth comes resilience, and that's what the arts has in abundance. I think it's like a really really resilient kind of trade and career. That's
really cool. Could you say more about what you mean by that?
I have some friends who run a collective called CHIP. It stands for Comics Help Inform People. And they've done a couple of really good involved anthologies kind of on the subject. Their most recent one being about working in the arts, in which they spoke with a bunch of different people. And it was all about debunking this framework of art not being a viable career pathway for people, and like breaking that stereotype of like the starving artist trope.
Right.
Which is, I think that's come a lot into like the collective conscious now as well, is that people seem to be shifting away from that. There is absolutely ways, be it via your 9-to-5 being creative, or pursuing it solely as like a freelancer in some sort of creative field part-time as a hobby, so be it. COVID gave us a great opportunity, I think, for a lot of people to like get in touch with that side of themselves, and to embrace it and realize how easy it was to incorporate it into their lives. It's quite a general statement. I think nothing's ever like easy, as it were.
Yeah.
But they were able to see how much it was benefiting their mental health, the things that they thought they'd lost from childhood, the way I'd given up art for so long and then come back into it. And that's another way of seeing how the seeds that they planted in their youth were still kind of being nurtured later on, and how they'd survived. I think a lot of people, particularly in these governments which value things like laws and the sciences, that sort of thing, hard sciences, tend to see art as like it's just this frivolous, exotic plant kind of thing. It blooms once in a lifetime.
Frivolous is a great word. Yeah,
exactly. And then it's gone forever. And it was nice that we had that, but let's not focus on it anymore. But we're more like, it's more like a cactus, like a succulent or something like that. It's something it's beautiful and it's sturdy and it's going to be around for a long time, and you don't need to constantly be giving it attention to know that it's still going to be there when you need to return to it. And that's what the real beauty is in it, I think, and the value in keeping it alive, because half the things we have now we wouldn't have if we didn't have the art.
Yes.
So.
It's almost more about perception. It's not necessarily that art is as a, hobby or career or, interest for people. It's not that it's more or less viable than it's ever been, but what is people's perception of it? What's the story they're telling around it? And so if the story you're telling is that, no, this like passion and interest and energy we're putting into our art is worthwhile and it's creating something and it is contributing to something larger in our society that really matters, then of course that changes the way you approach art or creativity or imagination. I think about, yes, that story of the starving artist, like you said, and then funny idea that if you're taking up like a craft as a hobby, that then you gotta create an Etsy store and like make it profitable. And it's like, okay, yes, like you said, like there's a lot of great opportunity for people to like make money, which they have to do to live, through their creative hobbies, but it doesn't have to be that. That is kind of a way of kind of putting art through a kind of capitalist lens, again, to be like, you have to profit off of it for it to be valuable, which kind of the exact opposite point, I would say, of investing in, art or doing creative endeavors, spending time doing that.
I've seen so many of those kind of people posting or speaking about that. And it's something so valuable that I think a lot on the other side of that, people who are like, yeah, get into these hobbies and do that in the next thing. And if you want to absolutely set up an Etsy store and sell it, and then they're like, also have another hobby that isn't monetized at all, and do something that's just for you, which I think a lot of people think when they go into something, they're like, well, the end goal is to be posting things out every kind of week and meeting this goal, that kind of thing. I'm like, just create for the sake of creating.
Yes, thank you. That's what I was like trying to say in a much like less eloquent way, but exactly, yes, creating for the sake of creating. And I feel like there's not a lot of that for many people.
Yeah, be it obviously time, like you've pointed out, money, other things. We've obviously spoken about the prevalence of AI and NFTs kind of cropping up at the moment.
Yeah.
But I think if you love something enough, and a lot of times that's what it is that people will start these things and then go to love it. And it's been the same with me with this career. There have been bumps and hurdles and dips. It's a vicious cycle for an artist where you kind of start by being like, oh, I don't know if I can ever do this. Will I ever do this? Will it ever be good? Will people like it? And then it comes out and you're like, of course, I'm amazing. I did it. It's wonderful.
Yes,
kind of thing.
Yes.
And then a new project begins and you kind of go through that cycle. And it's healthy, because we always say being able to look back on something. If you can't look back on something and be like, I would change that now, I would do this differently, I would do that in the next thing, then you're not acknowledging, obviously, where you'd come from and what you can do now, which is I'll finish drawing something within 2 seconds, be like, I could do that better. So it's really, really important that you're able to apply that to these moments where you're thinking, oh, it's just a hobby, it's just something that I'm going to do for a little bit, because that becomes part of your story and part of how you interact with others. It's really good for opening up, because then your friend goes, oh, I've always thought about doing that, should we do that together? And that's a wonderful thing about the arts, is that you can do that. I feel like in some of these harder quote unquote harder professions of like the sciences that aren't
Sure.
psychology, sociology, that sort of thing, is that there isn't always that opportunity to be like, should we just go draw a diagram and build a bridge? Do you think could be?
Yeah, right.
Engineering can't be that hard, kind of thing, which is like the beauty of it, is that you can do art badly and it's wonderful.
Right.
I love that.
Right. Yes. No, that's a great point. I'm thinking about, the creating for the sake of creating, kind of like if you're like, okay, well, what's the purpose of creating? There's one version where creating for the sake of creating. Awesome. Creating for the sake of, maybe it's your job like you, and that's great because it's a, source of income. And then also I think it's important not to look at it as so insular. Like if you are spending time on any creative endeavor, I imagine that, has like trickle down effects to the rest of your life. If you get to spend time being creative, maybe it makes you more creative in this other area of your life, or it opens you up to a new way of thinking. So I'm curious if you have experiences like that to say, oh, well, because I am an illustrator, it changes the way I show up to my relationships or this other work. Have you had that experience at all?
That's definitely interesting. That's something I hadn't considered before. If I was to think about it, I'd probably be able to think of some examples, but that's a really interesting way of putting it, in that you're obviously challenging yourself and you're working in this certain type of way. And then when it comes to other aspects of your life, you're then able to apply that. Is that kind of what you're?
Yeah.
That's incredible. I probably would, for one example, I would always approach my art as like, was it like you measure 3 times and cut once or something?
Yes.
That's kind of my approach to art as well, is that I will do so much preparation before it comes to sort of like the quote unquote final stages. It's the same when, say, someone mentions something in one of the group chats I'm in. I used to be really bad for just jumping straight in and being like, based on those 2 sentences, here's the response, blah, blah, blah. But now it's a case of like, okay, why do I think they've said that? Who's on the receiving end of what's being said there? What kind of impact will that have, kind of thing? It's something I picked up on in the kind of the transition between obviously 2023 into 2024. You're obviously in that reflective period of being like, what happened this year? What's changing going forward? And I was thinking to myself, I was like, I have been a lot better for acknowledging that and those kind of nuances that maybe sometimes you miss, because everything is done via social media these days. And it's so quick and easy just to fire off a message, and tone can get lost. And plenty other more well-versed people than me have probably spoken about this. So in terms of that kind of communication, it translates a lot to art as well, because you're going from writing a script to drawing some messy little sketches to then refining that, to then refining it again, adding all those different bits to it, going back and having that. I think I really value that as someone who can have like control over that, being able to recognize no matter how many times I polish this, like we said before, I'm going to look back at some point and be like, I missed that. I could have done this. I could have done that. Which is so good when it comes to interpersonal connections as well. Other aspects of your life. I could tidy my living room so many times, I'll be like, and I still forget to hoover under something. And it's all about that, like you said, that being creative comes with letting go and being able to like move on from that and not be so hung up on all the little bits of it.
Yeah. What I'm hearing you saying is that because you've had the opportunity to practice maybe being thoughtful in your art,
that's it,
in that process.
Yeah,
mindful that's maybe something you've also begun to take into your other relationships and the way that you approach people.
I think so too. Yeah, 100%. I did read a book on mindfulness last year, and I guess subconsciously absorbed it. I read so much of these kind of things for work, mindfulness and creativity, and how we engage with the practice and stuff. And then I feel like I'm immediately sucked back into something. So maybe those messages have been latent. They've been like the seeds we have planted in our youth, and they're coming back when I need them most, which is also a really interesting thing.
I think that I'm so interested, inspired, motivated by the work that you do and the perspective that it gives you, because it does kind of lend itself to a mindfulness or a thoughtfulness or an opportunity for reflection and obviously expression in various mediums. And I just think that's so important in our lives and not something that's cultivated enough. People kind of wear it like a badge of honor to say they're busy.
Yeah.
And people run from one thing to the next and never slow down and never take the time to reflect. But I think that's so important in our lives
essential
to do. But it's a hard practice to start if, again, you weren't taught how to do that or it wasn't modeled for you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting to think about art as one way to be able to, I keep using the word cultivate, but cultivate that in your life. Yeah, I'm thinking about, not to get too in the weeds of the theory of CMM, but what I'm trying to do in the podcast and in my life is just lean more and more into what I call taking a communication perspective.
Oh, I love
And
that.
so for me, that's kind of like centering everything in communication, or I think about it like it's like the lens I use. It's like, my communication glasses, or basically communication is the lens through which I'm trying to understand everything that happens in my life. And so part of that and part of the theory of CMM is talking about context, and beyond that, asking what's the highest level of context. And so that's just kind of getting at like what's motivating you right now. If different levels of context that we would talk about is like, okay, the episode of right now, this interaction is an episode and that's its own context. But then we have the context of the bigger relationship, or the context of the society, or even the context of like your sense of self, how you see yourself. It all plays a role, but if you can pause and take that time to reflect, it could give you a lot of insight if you can understand, what's my highest level context right now. And I was just thinking about that language in terms of what you do, because for someone whose highest level context is maybe about productivity, about being that busy person, about making a lot of money or feeling secure financially or in work ways, then maybe that person wouldn't choose to become an illustrator. So I guess this is one like really roundabout way of asking, if you're using that language that I'm using, like what's your highest level context that drives you to follow this passion of creating art and being an illustrator?
I think that was, first of all, such a wonderful thread that you've like managed to carry there. I was like so engaged with it, and I could see that reflected, first of all, and most importantly, in the context of the fellows in the comic that we're creating for the CosmoTeenz, and that you're talking about obviously this kind of parallel, this dichotomy of like the breathing room and the being able to understand that context from where they came from. The comics that we're creating obviously offer just that tiny snippet of this little moment, or these little abstract interpretations of what their journeys are, versus obviously all the work that has gone in from everyone on the team to go into it. That seems like the restful, almost kind of breathing space for understanding and like meaningful interaction to happen around obviously the hustle and bustle of us being like, right, we need to be here and we need to do that, and this is how we're going to make it happen, which is great because obviously as it's part of the CMM Institute, we want to reflect those values and what we're creating. And the way you framed it, I think, is just it's perfectly suited, which is wonderful. In terms of being a freelancer myself and having, as you said, that outward context, it is really interesting. I don't know if it's because, I don't know, of this internalized kind of culture of the grind mindset versus the production kind of output, in that I work a lot within moments, as you said, within those episodes. And I'm thinking, right, well, this is the current thing that needs to be done. So go for it, have it out, blah, blah, blah. Then you can have the 2 days and then the next thing, blah, 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 have it out. Paired with being a freelancer is that you're always working like 3 steps ahead. In terms of, you're like, okay, well, when this job finishes, then I have to plan to have that job finished so I can then work on that one in like 4 months' time, so that there's never a down period, and so on and so forth. And so when, like you say, you do have these moments where you're like, okay, how does that all inform what it is that I'm doing at the moment, and what it all kind of is for, or what I kind of see the end goal as being, so to speak. That's when you're kind of thinking, what is the end goal? For a lot of comic artists, they're thinking, I want to be able to pitch an original graphic novel, or I want to work for a big publisher, that kind of thing. That's what I'm working towards. And sometimes you can get lost in the doing, the kind of the smaller jobs that you need in order to make the funds, that kind of thing, work towards it. I think I gave up a while ago on this idea of like, I have to have this big thing to aim for, because I've loved collaborating, engaging so much with different groups of people, and being able to produce things like this project, the Pause project we did with Barbara a couple of years ago. I've loved that. If anything, I'm just striving to do more of that, and in the meantime learn from peers and kind of work together with them and propose different ideas of what we think is going on with this shifting kind of climate that we're in, this comics climate that we're in, and how it's developing as a medium, which is really interesting, and obviously feeds back into what we've spoken about before about being able to let go a little bit and understand that you can't always have this control over everything, and it's good to not have that, and good not to not fall into these traps of thinking, okay, if there isn't an immediate monetary value being ascribed to what this is it worth it?
I relate to so much of that with my experience of creating this podcast, in that I would say I could probably call myself like recovering perfectionist. And this podcast has actually been so important for that, because I just have to put something out every week. And that's kind of like a, standard or a schedule that I set for myself. But then I literally could not make everything, quote unquote perfect. I couldn't put that many hours to editing the audio or preparing for the interview, or, trying to make it perfect in this way. So I've experienced a letting go, kind of like you're talking about. And yeah, instead of being guided by the idea that, okay, I need to put out something absolutely perfect that will reach everybody and say exactly what everybody needs to hear, just kind of shifting from that mindset to like, I'm just going to try to create something that feels real and meaningful to me, and just kind of trust that it will also be meaningful to other people. And that has been a huge shift in my mindset throughout my 2 years of doing this podcast now.
That's wonderful. It's a lot similar to what, like, as comic artists, we say. I'm notoriously bad for it. I do it all the time, but we're like painstakingly working on like maybe the spine cover of a book on a bookshelf in the room in the background. And you have this moment, you think to yourself, no one else will scrutinize this single element the way that I do. And that is so freeing when you can. I have it sometimes when I'm like this close to like a screen or a bit of paper, and I just sit back and I go, it's fine. You can just step back. And that's what, like you said, that we've been able to do, because I'm also a recovering perfectionist. It's hard for us. But it's also very freeing to be able to do things like this.
Yeah. And I imagine, like you're kind of saying, you see it in art and in life in other ways, that there's value in both, in paying a lot of attention to detail.
Oh, absolutely.
And getting really up close. And then also the zooming out, there's great perspective in both of those.
Absolutely. And again, to bring it back to the CosmoTeenz, the Fellows project as well, that's what they, either unknowingly or not, through conversations with each other, they were able to do in their stories, is they both focus on the microcosm, their moments and their experiences, and then realizing those weren't kind of like insular, as you've said, and the macrocosm of how those feed obviously into the wider context of them as young people, them in the world, that sort of thing, which was really, really valuable for creating this series and realizing that it could be universal and applied to people without them even realizing at the time.
Yeah, right. Yes, that it can be both at the same time, and have meaning in all of those different layers.
It's really wonderful. And it's been really exciting to be able to delve like into that. As you've been saying, it's so wonderful to have that ability to be like, the detail, it's wonderful and then zooming out is again as well, because that's what I think a lot of young people, particularly in the context of the Fellows comic and what they were realizing, because they were going through these transitional periods and like being able to look back and reflect on where they'd come from. That's what it was giving them the opportunity to do as well, to be like, focus on this one particular instance in the story, which I felt at the time was going to be like my world, and that's how it was going to be from now on. And then we can pull away from that, look back and realize that, wow, it wasn't.
I
remember speaking with one of the fellows in particular, and they happened to mention something about, oh, it was just this thing and it's no big deal, but the kind of thing. We spoke for a little bit, and then we brought up the fact that like it is like a big deal for you, and it's allowed to be a big deal, and you're allowed to have these things that for you as a young person, not knowing what's going to happen next, you feel like, okay, well, I guess I just have to go with the flow and see where it takes me, and just have someone else say to you like, no, you are in control and you can have control of this instance, even if it feels like you don't. So that's always valuable, I think.
Definitely. That's really cool that you got to see that from them, and also be that voice to reassure, because I think that's the value in like sharing the stories. And when it all goes right, when the space is right and the people are showing up in the best ways that they can, then when you tell your
Absolutely.
story, you are met with those kind of people that are like, I hear you. This is allowed to be a big deal. Like, I
Yeah.
believe you when you tell me what your story means to you. I think that's something we could maybe all use a little more of like, yeah, I don't know, believing each other when we tell each other what things mean to us. And that's why I think something like art, which is so subjective, is like
Oh,
maybe a great practice in it. Like you said, you can do quote unquote bad art, but still be an artist.
yes.
There's a lot of room for, like you talked about, like this individuality and finding your own kind of style. I am curious about how you have developed your own style as an artist over the years. What's that process been like?
I think that's such an interesting question. I was thinking about this. I think about this whenever I send my work to someone, if
Uh-huh.
they want to review my portfolio or they just want to check out my work. And I'm thinking to them, obviously, it seems like I do have a distinct style, which I love and is great and is what gets me hired, which is
Yes.
always really fun. But for me, I see it also as part of that learning styles, is how I would frame it, is
Mm-hmm.
that I'm constantly wanting to adapt and to keep tweaking things and be able to be versatile within whatever I'm doing,
Mm-hmm.
um, which is also particularly prevalent to the fellows comics that we're doing. Is that
Yep.
because I'm the sole artist on the project, I want to push and make as many of these as distinct from each other as I
Yes.
can, while still having that thread of obviously my style through it, in terms of maybe how I approach it, from
Mm-hmm.
the penciling to the coloring stages, but then being able to put in little subtle differences. When it comes to developing a style, I wouldn't even know where to start. If people ever ask me about it,
Yeah.
I tend to just give a stock answer of, I'm like, just pick something you love and draw it to death. That's like the most rewarding way that you can
Mm-hmm.
develop something, is that by wanting to see what you want to create and being the person responsible for that is the most rewarding thing. And
Mm.
it's like feeding back into that. It's like instant gratification, because you're like, not only am I learning a new skill from this, but I'm able to enjoy what is
Yeah.
I've created. As a comic artist in particular, you have to conserve what it is that you can do within any kind of given time frame. I could sit and study like bikes and cars and
Yeah.
horses and buildings for hours, but if I find I'm never gonna draw them, then I just find that energy is better put into something else.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
for me, I'm always wanting to push. I learn a lot from other people. When I get to collaborate with others, it's wonderful to see, if I'm working from someone else's character designs, for example, someone
Mm-hmm.
else's script. Every script, character design sheet, pencils, that kind of thing is different, and I'm able to kind of adapt myself into those different molds and
Mm-hmm.
come out the other side and be like, what worked for me, what didn't, would I adapt any part of that process for myself?
Yeah.
So that's always really rewarding, is to be able to take all that in, suck it all up like a little
Yeah.
sponge,
Yeah.
and then see what it kind of holds going forward, which is really nice.
Yeah. That's really neat. I'm hearing so much from you that's resonating with me and seems I would anticipate that would resonate with other people kind of thinking about, you referred to your social world earlier. And one of the lenses that I want to use when I'm talking about my communication perspective is to be thinking like, what is that better social world? It's our kind of hope for the future. You talked about also, this time of year, you're doing a little bit of like looking back, reflecting, and then also looking forward and thinking about what your hopes are. And I think that's such a great thing to spend time doing. You need a little bit of both. I'm hearing that maybe for you personally, the way that your work as a comic book illustrator, your relationship to art, the way that it's maybe contributed to your own better social world. And let me know if I'm putting words in your mouth here. But it seems that it has really created the space for you to embrace a thoughtfulness and a mindfulness, like we talked about. And then, yeah, just also develop all of these other kind of skills and perspectives that help you in your art and in other areas of your life. Tell me if I'm wrong there and putting words in your mouth.
I think you're right on the money. That's, yeah, right off the top of what you've said, in terms of like looking at the way we've come from 2023 to
Mm-hmm.
2024, and kind of seeing, using that period to be like, okay, let's look back and see where we've come from, see where we're going. I think a lot of my practice has been informed by creating my web series a couple of years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and what that allowed us to do as like a really small team. It was myself, my co-producer Rachel, and a small little band of interviewers.
Mm-hmm.
we were able to platform so many diverse people, marginalized artists, writers, comic book shop owners, loads of people across the spectrum of being involved in comics in the UK. And that really set the precedent, I think, for me of what I want to do with comics, and that I want to make that kind of work, this kind of like celebrating diversity, making art, rejecting like these forms of oppression that we feel constrain us, and being able to do it in a way which we can look back on later and say like, look what the progress we've made, and look how far we've come from that. And we were able to do that by like taking a breath, taking stock of ourselves, and making sure everything was in a row, and then being able to move forward confidently, knowing that this change was going to be for the better and was going to be seen by people who would also respond in kind to what we were making, which is really important.
Absolutely. Thinking about just the beginning of our conversation, talking about whatever we talked about today, and, you know, different value that you've talked about that you've gained from your work is not only applicable to, you know, the small chunk of people that are also comic book illustrators. There's larger themes and lessons that I think will really speak to a number of people. But so just to use a little bit of that language more, that better social world, I'm curious about what is it? How do you see maybe art in general, creativity, comic books, you know, however specific you want to get, how do you see that contributing to a better social world for everybody?
Yeah, I mean, as we said, kind of like in the initial parts of the conversation, we were talking about how it opens dialogues. I see it as being very valuable as like a tool for getting young people, particularly those who aren't, or maybe struggling in school or struggling in general. Comics are a wonderful way to get them involved and get them engaged in like literature and understanding their own feelings, their own emotions. That's really important to me because I get the opportunity to work with young people occasionally, and seeing their response to that and how it helps them understand is amazing. Being able to have that freedom of expression as well. You can create comics regardless, and being able to let people in and invite them to kind of create for themselves and really commit to being free with it. I wish there was a better way, but honestly, if you were to take a crayon, scribble on a bit of paper, you'd be like, that was so freeing.
Yeah, right. No, I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
A couple of my friends talk about how there's never more free expression of art than when you're a child and you can just make on a page, knowing that there's like, you have no concept of this has to be like this, it has to be good in order for it to have value, blah, blah, blah. So being able to like inform bits of that within how I engage and want to create like a better social world would be to offer people that opportunity to acknowledge that there's freedom within whatever they're doing in their 9 to 5s, in these kind of cultures where we feel like we have to constantly be working, grinding, keeping going in order to allow ourselves that little bit of space to be fully like centered in this, like in ourselves and the work that art can do. I feel like I've rambled a little bit there, and I've just
I'm with you. I'm with you.
I hope that answers your question, or at least
definitely. No, it definitely does, and it makes sense to me. And I can connect the dots, basically, you know, of what you're saying of how more art and more creativity can lead to all of those things for people in our lives.
It does essentially feel like I just went more art. Always.
And if that's the takeaway from this conversation, so be it. Yeah.
Conversations like this where you can fully like across a whole spectrum of different topics, different discussions kind of thing, and still be able to find that common ground is really, really valuable, because then you could take that and you can really platform it wherever. That's what comics also allows you to do, is that you can take virtually anything. I think a lot of comic workshops that I've done in the past have brought people from different walks of life. There's no single age group, kind of gender group, anything like that you can kind of be like, these are the people who are definitely making comics right at this moment. And that's important for branching out into like the social world, I suppose, is that there tends to be a lot of onus on one certain particular group of people, when in fact there's much more out there, which is also about platforming and celebrating diversity in the current landscape.
Yeah, I love that. I see, again, a parallel of this art and, you know, communication, which is, who knows, maybe, you know, its own version of like art, I guess I'll say, and like, you know, requires creativity in that way. And it seems like a really key part of, I would say, like both of our works, is that it's less about finding the right way to do something or the one way you should be doing something, and more about opening up space for embracing what comes of collaboration with a number of different people, which is going to look like different styles and stories and ways of being, and kind of learning to make space for those to coexist because they can. And again, it feels very rebellious and countercultural to even, think like that, because there's such a sense that what's the right way to do things, and let's all be the most productive or whatever. But yeah, I like that idea.
Yeah.
Well, Sid, before we wrap up, is there anything else that you want to share about any of your experiences or reflections or hopes?
Yeah, just that I've loved working on this project. It's been such like a seamless, professional kind of collective of people who are like really interested in making a difference with what they're doing, which is really refreshing. I've done plenty of projects which I've loved, but it feels like there's only certain people within that kind of collective that are really engaged in what you're doing. So to come to this and completely be greeted by people who are like, yeah, we have a vision for this and we're really happy and engaged to be able to bring it to life has just been so wonderful. And I'm really looking forward to bringing it out. When you mentioned there about reflections, obviously we've talked about the fellows reflections as well. Occasionally it occurs to me that I'm part of the project too. I'm like so part of the project, I've forgotten I'm part of the project.
Yes, yeah, I see what you're saying.
If it makes sense. So when it comes to the time where I had to actually reflect on it all, I'm going to be taken aback. I'll be like, oh my God, I was like, we've covered so much. And
you've been so in it. Yeah.
I was like, where do I even begin? I would just gush about it, honestly. I would just gush about it all. It's been so wonderful to work with, obviously, the fellows themselves, with Barbara, with Kim, with everyone else on the team, with Trent, who has kept me sane. To be able to speak with you as well has also been really, really wonderful. I've loved it. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thanks for being a part of this, Sid. I'm really glad that we got the chance to speak too. Okay, that is all for our conversation with Sid. At the end of each episode, I like to offer some questions to reflect on. This acts as a next turn for us, so the conversation doesn't stop when the episode does. Today, the questions I would have you think about are: what would you create if you weren't worried about producing? And how can you embrace regret and acknowledge the things you would do differently as a sign of your own growth rather than failure? Obviously, these questions are inspired by our conversation with Sid today, thinking about creating for the sake of creating. And then that second question has really been sticking with me. I am someone that has always been very in tune with regret, perhaps a little too much so. So the idea that looking back on my past and seeing the things that I would do differently, not as, failures or things to feel regret or shame about, but rather recognizing, kind of tucking that away for later to say, okay, well, when the opportunity presents itself, I will do it differently next time. And it's a lot kinder of a way to look at your past and to understand how you've grown. I really liked what Sid said today about how they've seen growth within themselves and what it has meant to them. You can find these questions at the top of the show notes. I hope you can find some time to reflect on those in your own life. You're also welcome to reach out to me to share your reflections. I always welcome that, as well as questions or ideas you want to share. You can reach me through email, through the website, or by commenting on Instagram and YouTube. Another great way to keep dialogue going is to share this episode with someone you want to invite into the conversation. As always, I am supported by the CMM Institute for Personal and Social Evolution. This podcast is just one of many initiatives designed to create space for more conversations that move us toward those better social worlds we hope to create. You can learn more about the CMM Institute and other initiatives like CosmoKids, Cosmopolis, and now CosmoTeenz at the link in the show notes. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being curious. And thank you for being a part of this story. I'm Abbie, and this has been Stories Lived, Stories Told.